So you want to get into the Final Fantasy series, but you don't know where to start because there are a lot of games. I'm here to help you guys out with that problem. What's up, guys? I'm Roderick, aka Rodman, and welcome back to another video. And in this video, I'm going to be telling you guys some different starting points of the Final Fantasy series to get you into this series. So let's get right into the video. So I'm gonna go in order of best to worst way to get into the series, even though I don't think there is a quote-unquote worst way. All the ways you can get into this series are great, all the games are fantastic, but for the first way, and the way that I recommend the most, is I recommend starting off with Final Fantasy IV and working your way just chronologically through the series that way. Why? Because Final Fantasy IV is the first Final Fantasy to introduce a lot of different things, such as active time bar, as a really good story for the time. It's just a very good, probably the best entry level Final Fantasy game in the entire series. Also, there's so many different versions of this game to play. You have, the Game Boy Advance version, you have the original version, there's a version for the Nintendo DS if you want, 3D graphics, and also it just got a pixel remaster on Steam and PlayStation. So I highly recommend starting off with Final Fantasy IV. I personally believe this is also one of the best entries in the series, so you can't go wrong here. So this is the best way I recommend starting off, is starting off with 4 and just working your way forward, and then going back and playing 1, 2, and 3, because 1, 2, and 3, they're great games, but they are very different from 4 and onward. So let's go ahead and move on to the next way you can get into this series. Another way, and honestly this is probably the way that most new players of the Final Fantasy series will get into the series, and that is starting off with Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII is the most popular and the most iconic game in the entire series. That is not for any reason, though. This game is, quite frankly, one of the best games ever made, and you are not going to go wrong at all starting off with Final Fantasy VII. It offers some of everything: great music, great characters, great bosses, great story. So I do highly recommend starting with Final Fantasy VII, especially if you're not necessarily going to be like a die-hard Final Fantasy player. This is probably the game I recommend. If you were to play any game in the Final Fantasy series, I would recommend playing 7. So that is way number 2, is by starting off with Final Fantasy 7. The OG though, the original game on PS1, or you can get it on Steam. I do not recommend starting off with the remaster, because the remaster, honestly, it looks like it's going to go in a different way with the story. So if you want the original story, if you want the raw and uncut version of Final Fantasy VII, play the original. So let's go ahead and move on to the next way you can get into the Final Fantasy series. So the third way that I recommend getting into the series is by starting with Final Fantasy X. Why? It's because Final Fantasy X is the last turn-based Final Fantasy game in the series. And by turn-based, I mean purely turn-based. Yeah, Final Fantasy 12 and some other games has some turn-based kind of combat, but 10 is the last pure mainline Final Fantasy that's turn-based. Why is turn-based so important in Final Fantasy? Because that's the classic Final Fantasy experience. And if you don't want to go and play Final Fantasy 1 or something that's really old, this is going to give you the most modern experience of that in a Final Fantasy game. And of course, just like I said with 7, the great characters, great music, great story. You're not going to go wrong with playing this game. one of the greatest games ever made, one of the greatest games for the PS2, and it has, honestly, for any game in the series, it probably has the best post-game content in the entire series. Crazy super bosses, as you see right here. This great game. I recommend everybody play this, and if you get into the series, consider playing this one first. So let's go ahead and move on to the last way that I recommend getting into the Final Fantasy series. Listen, I know that Final Fantasy 16 isn't necessarily the most well accepted game in the franchise, but I'm gonna tell you this right now, and I made a separate video about this, but Final Fantasy 16 is one of the best games in the series. It's definitely top 5 mainline entry. That's just my opinion. If you have a PS5, there is no reason why you shouldn't pick up Final Fantasy 16 if you want to get into the series. It's the newest entry. Listen, this game is so good, y'all. This game is so good. Wonderful characters, wonderful story. This game, the only complaint that I had was the enemy variety. There's just I just felt like the enemy sometimes got a little bit repetitive. Other than that, this game is great. You can customize the main character the way that you want to. All of his abilities that he gets, you can choose which ones you want to use. Great music, great gameplay. Everybody complains about Final Fantasy straying away from a turn-based, but listen, this action hack and slash type gameplay is wonderful. Final Fantasy 16 does it very well, and if you want to get into this series and you have a PS5, pick up this game. It actually just got an update. It added some new things to the game, so this is a perfect time to go ahead and get into it. But that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video, guys. If you like this video, if you learned something new, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more content just like this. Ramen out. Peace.